Is the God of the Bible perfect? I had to stand up for this one. If the Bible is the record, then history is the evidence law. And what the evidence shows is not the reign of a perfect being, but the long, chaotic resume of a celestial manager whose every project ends in recall. If we read the Bible as God's performance review, it's an unbroken record of failed experiments, catastrophic resets, and moral contradictions. For centuries, we've been told that the world's problems began with human disobedience. Some fruit, some serpent, some woman's curiosity. But if we take the text seriously, the cracks appear long before Eden. Before sin ever touched soil, perfection had already collapsed in paradise. What follows in Scripture reads less like divine revelation and more like a case study in cosmic mismanagement. Each era, a new attempt to fix the last mistake. Each covenant, another recall. Heaven falls, Eden falls, humanity fractures, the flood resets, the covenant corrupts, and somehow the fault is always ours. This isn't blasphemy, it's a performance review. Because if we're to judge by the record, the Bible itself, then the being it describes is not a God of order, but of ongoing error. So let's open the file, let's look at the record. Not the sermons, not the songs, not the Sunday smiles, but the actual record of God based on the Bible and the beliefs built around it. Let's start with the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and apparently it was perfect. And then there was war in heaven, leading to God having to kick out a third of the angels. I wonder how that happened. These perfect beings were rebelling against their perfect creator in this perfect paradise. Perfect heaven, perfect beings, perfect rebellion, perfect failure. This, my friends, is the fly in the suit. According to the literature, the problem of evil is more diabolical than we could have ever imagined, because it finds its home of origin not in humanity, but in heaven among the heavenly hosts, which means that humanity has been scapegoated for the failures of its alleged maker. If rebellion can exist in the absence of temptation, in a realm untouched by hunger, pain, or ignorance, then perfection was never perfection. It was instability waiting for expression. The war in heaven exposes not human weakness, but divine volatility. How could a being that knows all things be surprised by disobedience? How does one wage a war against an omniscient opponent without being created to do so? Either the rebellion was part of the design or the designer was unaware, and neither option flatters the architect of reality. This is where the myth fractures under its own weight. If the first outbreak of evil happens under divine supervision, then the blueprint of the universe was flawed from the beginning. The first infection didn't start in the human heart, it started in heaven's halls. Evil, it seems, was a native language of the divine realm before it ever became the dialect of man. And so the story of creation begins not with the fall from grace, but with the failure of governance. Before Eden ever wilted, heaven itself had already cracked. The irony is thick. Humanity, forever told that it needs Satan, is merely living out the echoes of a celestial mistake that wasn't ours to begin with. Let's move on to the Garden of Humanity. So then God makes a perfect garden and two perfect beings to inhabit. And apparently, it was all good. But then the serpent, who technically should be the good guy according to the Bible's own words, reveals that God is being dishonest about their condition and capacity as humanity. Long story short, they believe the serpent, disobeyed the perfect God character, and quickly discovered that this perfect God was a liar, a deceiver, a cheater, and a heartbreaker. Y'all will catch that reference later. And he also has a preference for people being naked in his garden. We find out later that Jesus seems to share this same affinity. I guess it runs in the family. Now, this leads to God's disappointment in them for discovering the truth and inventing clothes. He kicked them out of the garden and banned them from Eden. And of course, he cursed the woman with fatal childbirth pains because why not? Now, just to catch up, that's two perfect places created by the so-called perfect creator that have both been mired with violent imperfection. And here again, we see the pattern repeat. Divine control masked as divine care. God plants a tree, forbids its fruit, then blames the eaters for curiosity he himself engineered. If omniscience knew the outcome, then disobedience wasn't rebellion, it was inevitability. The garden wasn't a paradise, it was a test site, not a home, but a setup. The serpent, ironically, becomes the only honest voice in the story, the only one who tells humanity the truth about its own potential and capacity. The moment they listen and their eyes open, awareness becomes the original sin. Knowledge becomes the crime. Now think about it. The act that makes us most human, our curiosity, is the act that condemns us. And for that curiosity, God punishes not just two people, but every generation that follows. He curses pain into birth itself, as if to make sure that every new human life would begin with a reminder of divine resentment. This is where the myth shows its hand. The God character doesn't want partners in creation. He wants dependence. Obedience is prized above understanding. Submission above self-awareness. The story of Eden isn't about the fall of man. It's about the insecurity of a deity who couldn't handle an intelligent species asking questions. Oh no, we still got a long road to go. Let's talk about the first generations. So God's mud man and rib woman go off and have two kids. Let's call them riblets. Now, one kills the other. Think about it. The first family on this planet, the one that God designed himself, raised a murderer. What is most often overlooked about this story is that the fight is about pleasing God, which means if the biblical record was to be taken seriously as a historical record, then the origin of murder resides in human attempts to gain divine favor. God belief inspires competition while providing no intervention. Even in the story, the God who is all-knowing and all-loving doesn't even care enough to show up until after the fact. He's an on-time God and all that jazz. And even just 7 generations down the line from Adam, Lamech kills someone, and instead of begging for mercy or forgiveness, he claims the divine curse of Cain as a desired blessing. Perhaps that really is the underlying thread behind this belief system: the freedom to harm others without consequence. But let's fast forward to a few more generations, to a time when humanity actually started working together, trying and striving to reach the heavens, and this perfect God who loves us so much and who desires for all of humanity to coexist and work together decides to scatter them, causing division, and even goes as far as to disrupt their languages, which would have set human collaboration back ages, giving way to prejudices and discrimination that did not previously exist. And then don't forget about that time that some of the perfect angels, the sons of God, snuck out of heaven to get some earthly snatched. So I'm guessing after the war in perfect heaven, God still failed to get rid of some of the problematic angels. See, at this point, the divine resume is looking less like creator of the universe and more like supervisor of repeated system failures. Every attempt at order births chaos. Every covenant births corruption. From heaven to Eden to the first family to Babel, each new act of divine design collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. And yet the pattern persists. A God who punishes but never prevents, who blames creation for behaving exactly as it was created to behave. In every scene, the deity arrives late, delivers punishment instead of wisdom, and calls it justice. The same God who cursed humanity for curiosity now condemns them for cooperation. What we see in these early chapters isn't the fall of man. It's the evolution of moral awareness. Humanity keeps trying to climb, to learn, to build, to connect, and the God of the story keeps tearing it down. The message is clear. Progress is blasphemy when your creator is threatened by creation. It seems that the God of this story might be a metaphor for ignorance itself. Now let's talk about the flood. God gets so upset at the behavior of humanity, who have also now been infected with the perfection of angels, that he is sorry that he even made them, and decides to murder all humanity, all the beasts of the field, and even the birds of the air, of course, except for his personal favorite, Noah, and 2 of each kind to be able to repopulate the earth with the thing that he just decided that he was sorry to have ever made. It'll make sense later. No, it won't. And after all is said and done, Noah makes an altar to the Lord, and this perfect motivator apologizes for doing what he just did, killing everybody. It's like a, I shouldn't have done that, huh, moment. You can't make up this level of incompetence. In full remembrance that the problem of evil originates in heaven, this is clearly indicative of God punishing humanity for his own admitted design flaws. If this were mythology, we could read these stories as projections of early human insecurity. But if it's theology, we're forced to accept moral absurdities as divine. Those of us who know better can clearly point to the mythic archetypes through comparative mythology, as well as the psychological projection, the anthropomorphic deity as a mirror of human insecurity and aspiration. I mean, peep the story. As soon as Noah gets off the boat, God's perfect man gets drunk. Like literally booty naked drunk. Something happens that is apparently more kinky than it sounds, and it results in God's man cursing an entire line of descendants, becoming the biblical justification for all types of xenophobia and racism. So let's get this straight. Perfect world, imperfect outcome. Perfect heaven, imperfect angels. Perfect plan, perpetual failure. Apparently, perfection comes with a lot of fine print. The tragedy isn't that such a being might exist. It's that billions still behave as though he does. And it's here that we see the great reversal. The flood wasn't a cleansing of sin. It was a reboot of denial. The same mind that regretted creation now reinstates it with the same flaws intact, proving that omnipotence without self-awareness is just vanity with a body count. God doesn't evolve. He reboots. Humanity, meanwhile, is left to relive divine mistakes on repeat, baptizing genocide as grace and trauma as theology. Every rainbow since has been less a promise and more a confession, a symbol of a deity trying to remember not to lose his temper. The irony is that the covenant wasn't with humanity, it was with his own impulse control. And somehow this cycle of failure becomes sacred. Mass death becomes moral. Survivors call it salvation. The story that should have ended the belief system instead becomes its foundation. Because in this world, divine cruelty isn't a bug, it's a brand. I think this is a good time to talk about the covenants. Let's start with the first person that God decides to establish his covenant with, Abraham. A man so desperate for attention that he is willing to mutilate his genitals and sacrifice a child, if asked by the right God, of course. A man who repeatedly practiced biological warfare using his plague-ridden sister wife as a Trojan horse to extract wealth from better people. The one that abandons the mother of his child and his child in the wilderness because things were getting a little too inconvenient at home. But he's not the only problematic patriarch. The rest of Genesis continues with more division, deceit, and disappointment as each successive generation of Abrahams, from Isaac to Joseph, is drenched in deception and division. Isaac against Ishmael, Jacob against Esau, Jacob against Laban, Joseph against everybody in the damn family. He gets sold into slavery, but finds prison to be a more hospitable and opportune environment than living with God's chosen family. And he becomes the second in command in Egypt. Now, his family, meanwhile, is dying in poverty, which I'm guessing is God ordained since they're the covenant family, and they have to come live in subjection in Egypt. Another overlooked reality from the literature is that after only 4 generations of being in covenant relationship with this perfect God, this God has led them right to the doorway of 400 years of slavery. What a deal, right? Who is this God? Mephisto? After 400 years of silence from their covenant God, in which they were allegedly enslaved and multiplying at mathematically unrealistic rates in Egypt, God saves them by forcing Moses to do the work and refusing to talk to anybody else except him to confirm that Moses wasn't absolutely out of his mind. There's so much more, but we only have so little time. There's that time God allowed Satan to kill Job's whole family on a day. Outside of other one-off side quests like this one, all of which are deeply disturbing in context, the rest of the Old Testament is literally just threats and empty promises because God's people, i.e., the people he chose, the apple of his eye, can't seem to get their shit together. And if we strip away the stained glass, the pattern becomes disturbingly human. Manipulation, gaslighting, and abuse rebranded as faith, obedience, and love. The so-called covenant is just coercion wrapped in reverence, a divine non-disclosure agreement where suffering is the signature. Every patriarch, prophet, and priest becomes another case study in spiritual Stockholm syndrome. The more they're mistreated, the more convinced they are of their chosen status. When Abraham raises a knife over his son, it isn't faith on display, it's indoctrination perfect. When Job loses everything in a heavenly wager, it isn't divine justice, it's cosmic entertainment. And when an enslaved people cry out for deliverance only to be met with 400 years of silence, it's not patience being tested, it's the psychology of despair being normalized. Across these so-called covenants, one thing is clear. The God of the text doesn't keep promises, he keeps hostages. So what is this perfect creator's master plan to fix this infinite crisis that began in his perfect abode and has now persisted even throughout all of his interventions? Well, if you let Christians tell it, he has a magical son who can fix it all, who he's been hiding from everybody else and didn't consider using before committing mass murder with the flood idea that he instantly regretted and created a memorial rainbow in honor of his victims for. Didn't decide to use him then. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't old enough yet. Now, this son has an interesting line of powers. He can heal the sick, cast out demons, and raise the dead, but only if you believe really, really hard and don't ask for proof. Now, while others have the power to bless their food, he has the power to curse his when he gets the right amount of hunger. But let's hit the really important ones because they're the ones that really matter in his perfect father's master plan, which is also him, by the way, depending on which Christian you ask. So he can do stuff to get himself killed. Believe it or not, this part is really important. He can go to hell and get some keys for some reason. I don't know how the keys got down there. He can also raise himself from the dead, allegedly. He can take away all the sins of the world. We don't even know where they came from. He can disappear back into heaven before finishing the job, and he can come back with the warrior host of angels, finish the rest of the job. Later. Much later. Like SpongeBob voice later. SpongeBob voice later. Yeah. But only if you believe really, really hard and don't ask for any proof. This is supposed to be the salvation arc of humanity. That he died to take away our sins because God, who is also him, remember, demands a blood death of the child of a youngling that he impregnated with himself. And yet Jesus died or is hiding out in heaven or just never existed at all. And here we are over 2,000 years later, and sin is still here while Jesus is still effectively absent. Awkward. To quote one of the prophets, the harvest is past, the summer has ended, and still we are not saved. And somehow this is sold as mercy. The logic of divine love becomes indistinguishable from the logic of organized crime. Create the problem, sell the solution, and call it redemption. The son's sacrifice isn't a rescue, it's damage control. The deity who demanded blood from his own creation now demands belief for entry into his next experiment, the new heaven and new earth, as if we forgot how the last ones went. If this were mythology, it would make sense. Dying gods, rebirth rituals are the oldest metaphors in the human playbook, along with the motifs of absent father and present mother. But theology demands we treat it as fact, which means the almighty solution to the cosmic crisis is not transformation, but theater, divine nepotism as salvation, a celestial PR stunt to rebrand cruelty as compassion. And what's worse, people still line up to defend it. They cute for it. They vote with it. They raise their children on it because somewhere in this cycle of guilt and grace, they were convinced that obedience is love and that questioning love is rebellion. The tragedy isn't that this story exists, it's that it became a blueprint for civilization. We built our moral systems, our governments, our families on the scaffolding of sacrifice, submission, and fear. The same story that begins with war in heaven still wages in the human heart because the real original sin isn't disobedience, it's credulity. Even with the church, an institution that only exists because Jesus didn't return, cannot point to 1 decade of unity on record of its 2,000-year-old fragmented existence. Everything that God has touched has resulted in persistent and perpetual depravity, often covered under an interwoven cloak of superstition, service, and sadism. Both the Bible and the behavior of believers are strong indictments against God as criminally negligent and deliberately indifferent, both which demonstrates him to be incapable of being in leadership or holding any authority at all, not even at a Chuck E. Cheese. If this were a trial, the evidence would be clear. Incompetence at cosmic scale. This is why I am deeply relieved that I live in a world where such a being has not been demonstrated to exist, though I am also deeply saddened that there are those who choose to behave as this character in his absence. For millennia, people have imitated this deity more than they've worshipped him, demanding obedience, silencing dissent, and calling it order. Churches became reflections of their maker, fragile, jealous, hierarchical, and obsessed with control. Every reform births a new denomination. Every revelation spawns another schism. Every prophet becomes a franchisor. The machinery of faith continues not because it brings truth, but because it brings comfort. And in a world that fears uncertainty, comfort often wins. If the Bible is the record of God, then the church is the record of what humans become when they model themselves after it. And what do we see? We see prejudice turned into policy, guilt weaponized as guidance, violence baptized as virtue, a cycle of trauma masquerading as tradition. The believer's devotion mirrors the deity's dysfunction, angry when questioned, fragile when challenged, cruel when cornered. It's not just a theological failure. It's a sociological inheritance. Generations trained to confuse submission with goodness, fear with faith, and ignorance with innocence. And because of that, the same moral architecture that justified slavery, genocide, and patriarchy continues to defend intolerance today. If this were mythology, we could admire it for its poetry. But since it claims to be truth, we must confront it for its pathology. And yet, even in the wreckage of belief, there's something redeemed. Not divine, but deeply human. The capacity to learn, to evolve, to rise beyond the need for gods, to build meaning not from obedience, but from understanding. So no, I do not mourn the death of gods. I celebrate the survival of humanity, the stubborn, thinking, feeling species that dared to question the illusion of its own oppression. Because in the end, the true salvation was never from sin. It was from belief itself. And ultimately, my friends, that is for those of us that do this work. There are many varying motivations, but nevertheless, the work gets done. And one of the questions we most often get is, if you don't believe in God, why do you talk so much about God? And the sad thing is that these people are blind to the reality that we're not talking about God. We're talking about them. We're talking about us. We're talking about behavior, boundaries, and battles that are impacting lives right here and now with the historical record of blood longer than my dictionary from Oxford. We're talking about people who cannot breathe in their own identity and ideas because of the behavior of Bible. In a world where people believe not only that this God is real, but that this God is also perfect, the standard of everything right, just, and moral, we have an undying obligation to speak truth loudly and to love others proudly. So for those of you who continue to wonder, let me set the record straight. What we do as humanists, atheists, agnostics, free thinkers, and non-believers who, instead of fading into the shadows of shame, putting ourselves on full display for the world to defame, this is a labor of love. We do this not because we hate your non-existent God. We do this because we hate what this belief is robbing you, others, and global humanity of. I do this because I love you and the world we share. So whether you're still in it, on your way out of it, never been in it, or completely done with it, I do this for you. Because contrary to what that imperfect book about that imperfect maniacal monarch, we are not falling from his subpar standards of perfection. We are rising into a story and purpose of our own, and we're doing it together. Love does not look like killing your child for clout. Love looks like lifting others so that we all may rise. When I think about what community is, when I think about what the church was for many people, I think about community as a service. I know so many people right now whose passion was media, and if it weren't for their church, they wouldn't be able to pursue that passion. I know so many people whose passion is music, and if it weren't for their church, they wouldn't have a place to practice that passion. I know people whose passion is communication and finding ways to inspire and motivate other people. And if it weren't for their churches, church shouldn't be the only place that meets those needs. It shouldn't be the only place that nurtures our gifts, platforms our voices, and empowers our living. That's why Bridge City Global is building community and creating the space to help you keep rising. Join us October 25th or the 26th in Venice or San Diego, your choice. Our local Bridge City community is having their initial liftoff weekend. And as a way of celebrating, we're hosting our very first Rise event. This is for you. We're about to shed the weight of limiting beliefs and open ourselves to clarity, purpose, and possibility. Through powerful voices and intentional community, you'll not only rediscover your own strength, but also the belonging that comes when we choose to rise side by side. And for those interested in being a part of this global community, go ahead and tap in now, and you may get an invite to our Friday evening and Sunday morning activities while you're in Cali. Don't miss this moment. Add Liftoff Weekend to your calendar and be ready to rise. Register now. Man, this is the week, and I don't know if you can tell, your boy is feeling the energy. I've gotten a head start. I'm already rising, man. There is so much happening, and I can barely keep up. I just got back from an incredible time at Mississippi State University with Bob Swanson and the freethinkers, atheists, and agnostics of MSG. But there is no rest for your boy. We are in the middle of a movement, and that means I got to keep moving. This Friday, I touched down in the beautiful city of Los Angeles in preparation to lift and launch our first local community, technically in two cities, Bridge City, LA, and Bridge City, San Diego. Somebody say, what you talking about? How wild is that? We're literally on the cusp of creating a tangible community where we can all connect better, build better, and live better. That's the call of Bridge City. Did you feel that? A place where everyone matters, everyone is welcome, and everyone belongs because we're connecting over our shared humanity, not our shared beliefs. So if you want to be a part of that movement, tap in right now. We're also hosting a transformative event called Rise, where we're going to process how to deprogram, reprogram, and transform our lives for liftoff. If you're tired of being stuck, if you've been struggling with finding clarity, if you just need that kick to get you off the pot, you need to register right now. Now, we're almost out of space in LA, so that window is literally closing. So whatever you're going to do, go ahead and do it quickly, player. And there is still a little bit more space in San Diego. Either one you choose, I can't wait to see you and help you rise. And even if you can't attend this weekend, consider leaving a donation on the event page in solidarity with the work, the mission, and the global movement. That's all I have for now. Thank you for staying till the end. And until next time, keep rising.